Hello everybody, this is Ron LeGrand and welcome back to the MentoRE. I know it's been a while since we've had a show up here on the Learning Planet, but hey, even the best television shows take a winter break, for crying out loud, so consider it our winter break. But we're back, and I have David Shearing on the phone. In fact, if you remember Dave, he is the episode number 9. So before we go too farther, I have to remind you that you should go back and review episode number 9, because that's where David and I went through a lot of prospects that he brought in. And when he left the show, he had 8 left that we had separated out of, I think, 18, wasn't it, Dave? I have Dave on the telephone because he's actually had to move back to Pittsburgh for family reasons, so we're not sitting here live today. We're commuting on telephone. Hello, David. How are you?
Hello, Ron. I'm great, thank you.
All right. So I'm going to just ask Dave the questions, because the good news is that since Dave left and went out and made an offer, he got one accepted, he's got it funded, and we've got a tenant buyer in it. So actually, he has brought that house to a conclusion as far as we're going to get it for the benefit of this show, because it's going to take that tenant buyer some time now to go get qualified and get a loan closed and all of that. So, all right, Dave, as I recall, you had 18 or 19 prospects that you went out and found. And I know part of the last show, you were in your house with your wife, and you guys were struggling over picking the right prospects. You kind of depressed me there a little bit. I seen you guys doing all that work, but fortunately it came out good, because you did get 1 out of the 8 accepted. And guys, if you remember, we had 8 pile A's and what was it, 10 pile B's, wasn't it, Dave?
That's correct.
Yeah. And now tell us, where did you found all of these bank-owned properties? What sources were you using for these properties to locate them? Would you refresh us on that?
Sure. We primarily used bank REO sites on the internet.
Okay. In fact, I think you found this one, what was that, a Chase bank-owned property?
Yes, that's correct. It was the Chase REO site.
All right. So you actually took the 8 prospects from the show, and then you went out and submitted the offers that we sat here and agreed on. We didn't actually agree upon them. I kind of shoved them down your throat. But during the last show, I do remember putting an offer on every single one of those houses. And so you made 8 of them. Did you get all 8 of them submitted, Dave?
We did, yes.
All right. So you got 1 out of the 8 accepted, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And that house is the one that was on Tequesta. If you guys remember, we showed a picture of a house that's on Tequesta. Not a very sexy looking house, I'll tell you that. It's just a plain looking box. It definitely needs landscaping out front, no doubt about that. And frankly, it's just a low-end, bread-and-butter, blue-collar house. Does that pretty much describe it, Dave? But it wasn't a decent neighborhood, isn't it?
Yes, it was on a quiet cul-de-sac with similar homes.
And I remember that the ARV on that house was about 80. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And they were only asking $26,900, as I recall, which is why we got so excited about it on the last show. And then you offered, what'd you pay for the house?
$25,000.
Okay, so you offered $25,000 and they accepted your offer, which means we probably paid too much. Okay, but so was there a counter offer? Did they just accept it immediately, or what?
No, they actually accepted it. It took them a little while to get back to us, but they accepted the $25,000.
Okay, so then you sent them the $1,000 deposit, and so now you have a contract. So, all right, you got the offer accepted. Then what did you do?
Well, once I got it accepted, I went looking for a private lender.
Okay.
For some funding.
All right, and you found a private lender?
I did.
All right, and what did you borrow on the house?
I borrowed $29,500.
You borrowed $29,500, and you paid $25,000 for the house.
Correct.
Did the house need any work on it at all, really?
Well, it did. It needed. We had estimated repairs at about $7,000.
You had estimated repairs of about $7,000, but you didn't do those repairs, did you? Tell us what happened to the house. What was the end conclusion here?
Well, what we did is we put a nice ad on Craigslist for a work for equity buyer.
A work for equity. You might want to stop here just a second and explain that to our listeners if you give me a minute. Guys, that means that Dave decided he didn't want to do the work on the house. A, because he didn't borrow enough money. He could have, but he did not borrow enough to do the job. If we had an $80,000 R, we could have borrowed more than $29,500 on it, a lot more, in fact. In fact, we could have borrowed enough to bring home some cash and repair the house and everything else. But Dave also knew at that point that he was going to have to go back to Pittsburgh, so he didn't want to get involved in those costly entanglements. So he borrowed enough to pay for the house and then some. And then he found a tenant buyer to do some of the work. Really, that wasn't that much really work to do, was there, Dave? That was $7,000 as if you would have actually spoofed it up and really got it in jam-up condition for a qualified buyer that gets kind of picky. Is that true?
Yeah, it was, and it was at that number we would have been paying a contractor to do it.
Yeah. So really, the house was livable like it was. As I recall, it didn't need that much work that had to be done to live in it, right?
That's correct.
All right. So Dave found a buyer, a tenant buyer. Dave lease optioned the property to a tenant buyer. And what was the sales price, Dave?
The sales price was $60,000.
$60,000. So you gave it to him really cheap, didn't you?
I did.
Of course, $60,000 price is not a bad price to charge for a house you just paid $25,000 for. So I'm not gonna dispute that. All right. How much money did you get down, Dave?
I got a $2,000 payment, non-refundable down payment.
All right. So you got a $2,000 non-refundable deposit, and what are they paying for rent?
$650 a month.
$650 a month. So, what was the term on the lease? A year?
Term was a year, yes.
All right. So you lease optioned the property out for $60,000, and you gave them plenty of credit for work to be done on it, and you got $2,000 non-refundable deposit and $650 a month until they get qualified on a loan. Are they in a credit repair program right now, Dave?
Well, that's an interesting question, Ron. I just spoke with them, and they are entering that program as we speak.
Okay, so they are going into a credit repair program now, so that when they get repaired, we take them and we get them a loan. So as soon as we get the credit score up, then they'll qualify for another loan, and then they can go get a new loan and cash everybody out, and they get credit for the $2,000 down payment, plus any money they spend on materials if they keep those receipts. So by the time they get their credit fixed, they'll be ready to go get this money, and they'll have enough down payment to satisfy even FHA parameters. So basically, it's just a long-term delayed cash sale is what it amounts to. In the meantime, Dave's collecting more than enough to pay the private lender, and got a tenant buyer in there that's more like a buyer than a tenant, because they're responsible for doing the work with their money, and they're at risk if they don't. So, well, we got that one done. I'll tell you at the end of that show, though, Dave, we discussed a house, I recall, on Hempstead. I know that it was a FSBO, and that the owner owed about $65 on it, and they were only asking $80, and you thought it was worth about $150 or more, but it did need about $20,000 worth of work. So tell us, what happened on that deal? Because I recall we were going to go try to buy it with nothing down with owner financing for the $80. Is that right?
That's right. Actually, what happened, Ron, is that I made that offer, which they did accept.
They did accept it? What was the offer?
The offer was we would take over the underlying debt.
Okay.
And we would essentially do an agreement for deed and pay them $80,000 for the house.
Got it. So to refresh everybody's memory, we were going to buy the house for $80,000, just their asking price, give them an agreement for deed, and pay them the same $740 underlying payment that they were paying out, and then some kind of a term by which we would pay them all off. I think it was a 5-year term. Did you put that in? Was that the agreement or what?
It was 5 years.
So we were buying a house with nothing down, and then Dave had to move back to Pittsburgh. But in the middle of that time, they had more, what did they have, damage or something to the house?
Yeah, they had a break-in and some tree damage from a storm, and they were at that point, they were negotiating with their insurance company, and unfortunately, I had to head up north here and wasn't able to conclude the transaction.
So you had it all negotiated, ready to go, and then they had some other issues that you just didn't have time to work out before you left, and you didn't want to mess with it living in Pittsburgh and the house being here in Florida, which I certainly understand. But it did appear to be a pretty good deal there, didn't it?
Yeah, it wasn't a great deal, really.
All right. Well, sorry you had to move, and I hope everything works out up there in Pittsburgh, but I appreciate you taking the time to do this show with us, and you're just another example of someone who can go make money without using their money, and there it is. So if you do what Dave does, if you do what Dave did, and you learn how to make offers on properties and select them out of the MLS or wherever you're going to buy them correctly, it's just a numbers game. So, Dave, I'm going to go ahead and turn you loose then and do a little bit more teaching here before I end this show, if it's okay. And I appreciate you taking the time to do this episode with us, sir.
It was my pleasure, Ron. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you, and hope to get down and see you sometime soon.
You will. No problem. Thank you very much.
Bye, Ron.
Bye. Okay, guys, that was David, and just as a reminder, here's what David did to get that deal done. Now, let's face it, he didn't make a killing on this house. Even if he sold it for $60,000 cash, it was just a little low-end house, but it was one of his first deals, so it was something for him to play with. But remember, he bought a house with none of his own money. He borrowed more than he paid for it with a private individual, which is a person, not a bank, not an institution. The private person loaned him $29,500 on a house that was worth $80,000, and then he put a lease option tenant buyer in it. Tenant buyer gave him more money. Tenant buyer's giving him money every single month. In fact, his payment on that house is about half of what the rent is that the tenant buyer is paying. So David's getting a cash flow every single month on the house. He got $2,000 from the tenant buyer. He got several thousand from the loan, and that's the way the business works. He found the deal by going right on the internet and accessing the REO sites, which anybody can do, and making offers based on the formulas that I gave him. And let me give you the criteria for selecting these projects one more time, and then we'll end this episode. Number one, I'm looking for properties that are listed well below the ARV. The ARV is the asked for repaired value. So if I've got a house that says that's worth $100,000, I think in excellent condition, and they're listing it at $90,000, I have no interest in it if I'm paying cash for it. Now remember, these are only cash deals. However, this one was worth $80,000 and listed at $26,900, so that's what attracted us to it. Big gap. A lot easier to buy them when they're listed down here than when they're listed up here. Secondly, we want them in decent areas. Now, the house that Dave bought on Tequesta is not in one of my favorite areas, but it's not in a war zone. It's in a decent, sellable area where people who can qualify for a loan want to live. So it passed that test. And thirdly, we don't want major rehabs. In fact, this was just another example of a house that needed very little work on it, that was bank owned, because today, if they need a lot of work, we're going to shy away from them. Guys, we can buy them for we can buy them today needing very little work for what we used to have to pay for them when they needed major rehabs. I don't want the costly entanglement of major rehabs. Just like this one, I want to get in and get out, preferably put somebody else in there that can do the work with their money. In fact, as we're taping this here today, I just did one of these today right here in this same office with a house that I already had. Put somebody else in there and let them do the work. They use their money, their labor, and then when they get it finished, we'll take them out and get them a loan. And let's see what I just say. I want a big spread between the ARV and the asking. I want it in a decent area, and I don't want a major rehab. And frankly, the longer it's been on the market, the better candidate it is. Because if it just came out on the market, then there's going to be a frenzy over it, and the lender's going to be asking way more than I'm going to want to pay. So when it sits on the market a while, then the lender gets more motivated to move it when they see the market's not going to grab it for this too high a price. And that's when I'll step in and get my best deals. So those are my 4 favorite criteria right there. But remember, they only apply to all cash deals. And that's the bank-owned world we're in today. So thank you for tuning into this show. I hope you got a lot out of it. I'm glad to see we got that first deal done. And there will be more shows to come. In fact, we got one coming up here real soon on contractor wars. And then we'll have another one right behind that where we'll get back to work with Lauren, calling FSBOs, and I'll see if I can't get our attorney to get some work done as well. And by the way, he's the hardest of the 3 to get moving, so stay tuned.